Hi everyone, welcome back to The Learning Gardener. If you haven't been here before, my name is Pip and welcome to my garden. I thought what I would do in today's video is take you through my 10 favourite plants for this season, as we are now basically at the end of summer here in Australia. We are on the south coast of New South Wales in a Zone 10 garden. I thought I would show you 5 ornamental plants that I've loved and 5 veggie plants that have been great performers this season. And we'll kick it off with the Roald Dahl David Austin rose. This rose has been an epic performer. The plant itself is only supposed to get 1 meter by 1.5 meter, and this is a very immature plant and it is already at least a meter wide. I have found them to be prolific growers in pots. All of my David Austin roses need to be rebloomed. We have, for various reasons, saved a lot of petals from these this year, and they have been absolutely beautiful. They save really well in the fridge, but the plant itself smells divine. And while you might see little pink spots on the petals when it gets some intense rain, generally speaking, this plant has been completely resilient to our conditions. Generally, roses haven't loved our coastal garden, particularly hybrid tea roses. They've all got black spot. These are only just starting to get a little bit of black spot now at the end of the season after a lot of rain, but the color on these is just gorgeous. The first blooms were much larger than this. They were a bit more orange, but it's a very soft, subtle color, and they're just absolutely gorgeous. And they have just basically been on bloom repeat all summer. So this is one of my absolute favorites. As a slightly random offshoot as to why I love this plant, the pollinators have also really enjoyed it, but we've actually got a butterfly chrysalis in here at the moment, which is kind of amazing. If you're looking for a veggie plant that is going to perform and provide entertainment value, then look no further than the Tromboncino squash. They have these ridiculous squash growing off them, which is the whole reason why I grew this plant. And they're absolutely massive. So these ones are going orange now because they are maturing. If I allow them to fully mature on the vine, I can use them like a butternut squash or a butternut pumpkin or a winter squash. So they will be shelf stable. In this green form, I can use them like a zucchini. So if you've watched this channel before, you know I've had some issues with this vine, but I'm willing to put up with it because it is quite a hilarious thing to grow. So these squash are so heavy that it collapsed the first arch. I had to harvest all of them. Each of the squash at that time were at least 2.5 kilos. So what's that, like 5 pounds? And yeah, it was just crazy. And the plant was putting on at least a foot of growth every single day at the height of summer. It was just insane. And you can see it's like the thing that was squashing the Valentine tomatoes is this plant, because even though it looks rubbish on this side, it's decided to have a second wind and climb into the next garden bed and climb over the archway in the middle of the yard. So it does need some support if you're going to grow it, or some space, but it's quite funny. And anytime someone comes to visit my garden, they're always walking around going, oh yeah, it's really lovely, it's really great. And then they see this and they're like, what is that? And everyone is fascinated by this plant. I've been fascinated by this plant. I would 100% grow this just for fun. As it happens, the Tromboncino that I have had so far, I turned into zucchini soup / Tromboncino soup. And it's been really tasty. I haven't tried it in its orange mature form because, as you can see, that process is still happening. But we have something like 2 or 3 days left of summer, and it has all of a sudden decided to put on more squash. Why is that awesome? Because number one, it's putting on more squash. This is a prolific plant. I already have harvested at least 5 huge Tromboncinos. There's at least 5 more that are maturing, and it's now got at least 6 or 7 more that are sizing up as we speak. So 2 seedlings has given a massive amount of food, some of which is going to be shelf stable as we go into the cooler months, which is just amazing. But it's also been amazing for me because my zucchinis have been terrible this year, so I haven't had enough zucchini outside of the first 3 weeks of summer where I had too much. Standard state of affairs for zucchinis. But then since then I've had none because the plants just kind of curled up their toes and died, and may have got neglected and ignored and died because of me. Whatever, small things. But this has taken its place and performed beautifully. So definitely give this one a go, especially if you want to just watch something grow in amazement and be blown away by how quickly something can grow and how huge it can be. This is a purple buddleia, and it has been a stellar performer. This garden bed is actually in a kind of awkward spot in my garden. It is where the water, when it rains, comes flooding down the driveway, down the side of the house, and comes crashing through here. There was a big tree here when I first moved in, so there's a lot of large tree roots under here, and there was a huge amount of weeds. So it is a tricky garden that's only been established since August of 2024, and we are now at the end of February in 2025. This plant, when I put it in, would have been maybe this tall. It would have seriously been about this big, and it has just performed beautifully. It does need to be dead-headed because the blooms are kind of a bit brown and unbecoming, but I mean, you could leave it because there are so many buds on this. It is starting to wind down in terms of how often it is pumping out new flowers, but there's still a ton of blooms on it, and it's got this beautiful silvery color, and it's quite soft to touch on the leaves. But the bees have just gone wild for this plant. We have seen native bees, the blue-banded bee and the teddy bear bee, all over this plant, which has been absolutely amazing to see. And interestingly, I do have other color purple buddleias in the garden pots and out the front of my house. Bees are not as interested in those particular buddleias. They just really love this one. And I don't know if the bees' lack of interest in the other buddleias are because they haven't done as well. They are teeny tiny plants and they have not put on anywhere near as many blooms. But this plant has just been divine, and actually they make a really beautiful cut flower. I love the pairing of this soft purple with the soft orange of the Roald Dahl David Austin roses. It's absolutely beautiful, and I just find if I come out and just deadhead it regularly, it just keeps pushing new growth, keeps pushing more buds and more blooms. So this one has been a great performer, and I'm really hoping that it gets even bigger next year because I really want to hide the Colorbond fence behind me. I just hate Colorbond. And I'm hoping that there's quite a few plants in this garden bed that will put on a lot more growth. And there's a rule I've heard in gardening before that the first year the plant sleeps, the second year it creeps, the third year it leaps. It's going to be interesting to see this plant in 2 years' time if this is it sleeping. My next favorite veggie is actually being weighed down by one of my other favorites, which has a vine that is growing out of control. But this plant, buried underneath the other one, is the Valentine tomato. So I don't have any ripe ones to show you because I've already done the harvest for today, but they are a larger cherry tomato and they're kind of heart-shaped. I have found them to be prolific. I have found them to be tasty, most importantly, and fairly disease resistant, and they're the kind of perfect tomato for packed lunches and things like that. They're an excellent tomato in terms of storage time in the fridge. They are just a cracking tomato, and they're really productive. What I love most about them is probably, you know, nothing to do with food production value, is actually seeing the kind of truss of tomatoes and having them hang down and having the top ones be red, then orange, then green, and they just have the most beautiful color display. But they are an amazing tomato, and they've put on a lot of growth, and they put on a lot of tomatoes, and they spread their harvest out quite nicely. So I find a lot of tomatoes, you're waiting, and then for like 2 or 3 weeks there's just a mad amount of tomatoes. These guys have spread out the harvest beautifully over weeks. It's just a fabulous tomato and a really tasty cherry tomato, but it also really tolerates our conditions here on the south coast really well. It just hasn't held up to a heavy climbing vine climbing all over it. This garden bed is pretty much packed to the rafters with my favorite plants, and my all-time favorite plant since I was a little kid is just down here, and its blooms are only just starting to burn out now, which blows my mind because it is a early spring flowering plant and it has been flowering since winter. This is the flannel flower. It's a native Australian flower. Its leaves feel a little less like flannel than the flower, but the flower petals feel exactly like beautiful, fresh flannel. And they're a very crisp white with it, just a very faint green tip on the edge of the flower that does fade as the flower ages. But this flower as a cut flower is sensational. They have an incredibly long vase life, incredibly long, and like I've had these in vases for 2 or 3 weeks, no problems at all. They're absolutely gorgeous. I've also tried using them, drying them with silica, which worked really well, and then using them in resin castings, which didn't work so well. They lost some of their color, but I just love the feeling of this flower, and when they're in bloom, they're just beautiful. There's just really no competition for me for this flower, and we've got 2 really happy, healthy plants here. I've got 3 more that I've got to plant, and I just always want my garden to be filled with flannel flowers. They're not a flower that you see that commonly out and about in Australia. They are very hard to grow, and apparently they only live for 3 years. So in my brain, I'm buying flannel flowers every year to put in the ground so that they can have a year to establish before they really get going, and then by the end of the next year or 2 they should be burning out. So at least there will always be some coming through, but these guys have done really well here, and I actually really love the color combination and the silvery foliage with the buddleia and with the lamb's ear. It's just been a beautiful combination here. We have had a sensational year for berries. All the berries have done really well, but it has been the first season for these thornless blackberries, and boy oh boy did they perform. They're still performing. We've got 3-4 days left of the summer, and there are still these absolutely enormous blackberries. This one's not 100% ripe, but I am giving up on the blackberries at this point. They do kind of come with a funky fermented smell by this point, and a lot of that is because fruit fly have now well and truly got in. I have actually given up completely on harvesting for a while now, but there's still a ton of fruit on this plant. So I need to come up with some strategies for how best to manage the fruit fly next year, whether I forego some fruit and put bags on them earlier. The bags definitely did protect them against the birds, but the birds, to be honest, they're not that interested. There's a ton of berries out here that haven't got bags on them that the birds haven't touched, but the berries were so tasty, so prolific, and like this is tiny by comparison to the berries that I was getting at the beginning of the season. They were absolutely massive and glossy. It was actually almost irritating how prolific this plant was, just because you couldn't really leave the property without losing masses and masses of fruit. So I think at this point what I'm going to do is just snip off all the berries and call it quits on this season for the blackberries, just because the fermented smell around here is quite strong, and cutting into blackberries and finding that they're full of grubs is not my most favorite activity. But I might do one more harvest. I haven't decided yet. I mean, there's a ton of blackberries sitting in the bottom of those bags, so I really need to do something about it. But this has been a star performer this year. There's a couple of reasons why I am putting this plant in the ornamental category. This is a loofah. It started off being a spindly little vine, and I was worried that nothing was going to become of it. But as you can see, there's actually a dragonfly balancing on it beautifully. Oh my gosh, pause the video. I'm going to try and capture this moment for you. Don't scare the dragonfly away. Oh, freaks me out like a wasp. I don't remember what I was saying because I was busy marveling at nature. Anyway, the vine has turned into a massive vine. So if you're going to grow this one, you definitely need to give it something to climb, because that's what it wants to do. Before I hedged back my neighbor's bamboo that had flopped over the fence, this was going for it. It was going to head next door and keep going. It has found its way through the garden beds and weaving through everything. It's heading over onto a whole nother archway now, but it is absolutely beautiful. And where my pumpkins are kind of looking a bit weathered and like they have a powdery mildew, the green on this is so beautiful, and I love looking out the kitchen window and seeing it. But then we've also got our loofahs. Okay, technically you could harvest a loofah early and you could eat it, but who's doing that? I'm growing the loofah for loofahs. I'm going to be able to make my own sponges. I grew sponges in my garden. How crazy is that? So once again, novelty value, but also huge functional value, and it's put on a ton of loofahs, and they're really just getting massive really quickly now. So I'm very excited. Now I won't be harvesting these until they go all the way brown, and then I will soak the skin off, and underneath that will be the sponge type material of a loofah. And then I'll be able to cut it into pieces and have loofahs that I grew at home that have no bleaches, no chemicals, no nothing on them, and I'll be able to use them. And it's just insane. Bug, it just really blows my mind, the things you can grow in the garden, and also the amount of trellising that I need to do for this guy. Lucky I have a few in my pocket that tie you up. But this plant is incredible. So let's see how many we've got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 loofahs from 2 plants. And that's just what I can immediately see. Who knows where else this plant has started to create loofahs? I haven't even looked on the other side. If you're a stickler for the rules and feel that the loofah doesn't quite fit into the ornamental plant category, then I have a substitute backup favorite for you, and it is this Black Embers dahlia. It just isn't looking particularly good at the moment. It actually needs to be deadheaded, but you can see the amazing colors on these blooms. And the first one that we picked this year was bigger than a dinner plate. It was absolutely mind-blowingly big, but the color has just been sensational. The camera does not pick it up as beautiful as it is in real life, but it's going to be really sad to see this finish up for the season. There are still more buds on it, so that means I've got more of this gorgeous flower to still enjoy, and I really am looking forward to dividing this dahlia and having a stack of them throughout the garden. They've been a really strong performer. I only needed to stake them up once we got some 100-kilometer-an-hour gusts of wind through here, and when the flowers were like this and they were just too heavy. But generally speaking, it has stood up on its own. The flowers have been gorgeous. The vase life has been pretty great too, and it's been beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. Something else I've historically grown just for the novelty value more than anything else is apple cucumbers, because you get this thing that is shaped like an apple and tastes like a cucumber, and it's kind of fun. This year, terrible performer, so we're going to skip right past my usual favorite and go over to a new favorite. Now you might think this just looks like a hot mess of tomatoes, and that would be factually accurate. This is an area where there are a bunch of different tomatoes growing. It was initially a San Marzano area, and apparently I sowed 1 pineapple tomato here, and I am so glad I did, because the garden bed that I dedicated to pineapple tomatoes, I reckon it's got some sort of soil disease, because all of those pineapple tomatoes had something funky going on with them, and one managed to produce 3 tomatoes, but that was the only 3 flowers from 3 plants, and it's been a mess. So the Rogue One pineapple tomato plant that has made it over here, there's nothing that's quite ripe yet to show you over here, but it produced a massive tomato that was nearly a kilo. It was absolutely huge, and I really, really like pineapple tomatoes. They're a beautiful yellow color streaked with red, and they taste a little bit sweeter than a normal tomato, and there's just a slightly different flavor that is absolutely divine. Usually I have failed to get much of a harvest before, but because the parrots, the king parrots, which are gorgeous birds, very, very shy, so I'm really happy to see them in my garden, but they also really like pineapple tomatoes. So the fact that this is a hot mess of tomatoes has actually been really good, because it's meant that as the pineapple tomato plants have matured, they've been hidden away from the parrots underneath a canopy of San Marzanos. The pineapple tomato may have provided me with the biggest tomato I have ever grown in my life, but the orchard has provided me with the first watermelons I've ever grown, and they were absolutely massive. We do have one teeny weeny sugar baby watermelon here that is trying to make one last dash for summer, and there's a couple of other little ones scattered about, so I doubt they will turn into anything, but I still have a couple of massive watermelons in my fridge. I've shared them with my best friend who lives a couple of doors down. I've shared them with my neighbors. It's been really, really fun to learn about watermelons, to harvest your own watermelons, and to taste a watermelon that is fresh off the vine. It is so juicy and amazing, and it's just, again, the novelty value has been high, and they're really tasty. So I've been really happy with the way the sugar babies have performed, and yeah, they're just a great plant to have in your veggie patch. My final pick for top performer of ornamental plants this year has to go to my Pittosporum or Pittosporum trees, depending on how you want to say it. These are my privacy trees / hide the color bond trees. And the reason I picked these was because I was told they put on about 1 meter in height of growth per growing season. And I would have to say that that is an understatement. These trees have done so well. So these particular ones here survived a flood. Pittosporums don't generally like to have soggy feet, and our ground, because this property backs onto a little river, can really hold moisture, and we had something insane like 1.4 meters of rain. I forget the exact time period, but it was like 8 weeks. It was just an absurd amount of rain, and we full on flooded. The little river down the back went from a trickling stream to a raging torrent that took out a local bridge, and the ground was like soup. And so where I am now, underneath this wood chips, is a trench that I dug in the middle of winter to try and facilitate fluid flow off this property. And as I was digging through here, it just turned into a bog, and these trees were looking like they were pretty unhappy. And I know that these trees, once established, can do well here, because other people in the neighborhood have some that have been here for 20 or 30 years, and they're beautiful. So I knew if I could just get them through that they would do well. And so I dug them up, and at that point their root balls had almost rotted. They were like this big on some of them, and so they did struggle with our spring winds when they came through, but I did stake them up, and they've definitely put on at least 1 meter of growth despite having that start to the season. And these ones haven't thickened up as much as the other ones, probably because they went through that, but you can see how much growth they put on. When I got these, they were up to here on me, and I probably got them 18 months ago, and they've put on 100% more than 1 meter of growth per season. So these are an amazing privacy tree. They're a beautiful tree, and they're really, really easy to grow. If you have them and you want them to put on a lot of growth, the advice I was given was to feed them, and feed them often. I haven't done that. I've pretty much walked away and neglected them, and they've still done beautifully. I'll show you the other area where I planted them where they've done a lot better because they didn't get drowned. But I only lost one tree in that flood, just one, and they've done so well. I'm really, really happy with this plant. If you can believe it, these ones were even smaller and more spindly than the other ones I just showed you when I first put them in. These ones have put on an epic amount of growth. They have put on so much width and thickness as well. I have had, I think, a little bit of issue because they have grown so quickly. I don't know if their root ball has been able to establish enough to tolerate this huge amount of growth in 100-kilometre-hour winds, which we do get not infrequently. So recently they did flop over a little bit after some rain, but they have multiple times been hit with that amount of wind and done totally fine. So I think it was just that the ground was soggy. The other issue is underneath here, I know that there are some concrete drainage bricks and the ground here is very compacted. So I don't know if the root ball is necessarily keeping up with the huge amount of growth, but the plant's still totally happy and doing really, really well. So this is a beautiful performer and I can't wait till it gets a little bit thicker and kind of recovers from that recent wind-swept episode and thickens back up into the beautiful hedge it was, because it was providing some amazing privacy and I couldn't see the colour bond at all, which is all I'm really looking for in life. That's all I'm really looking for from any plant, really. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video about my 10 favourite plants for this season. It was really hard to pick because everything kind of comes into its peak at different times. Like this is just looking absolutely gorgeous now and I'm loving the colour combination with the salvias, and the English lavender have just been divine this season. But these plants have been either just the ones I've enjoyed growing the most, whether it be just simply for novelty value, or I've just really enjoyed the colors and the scents that they've brought to the garden. So I hope you guys have found something interesting in this video, and I really appreciate everybody's time today, spending it with us. I just so appreciate it, and all the recent new subscribers. Thank you so much for your support. It's been really heartening to see it grow a lot lately. I really appreciate all the support, and hopefully we will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.